Imagine you're struggling to sleep. You just cannot fall asleep. Every time you hit the bed, you just cannot go to sleep. You might have been really tired, you were just exhausted, but the moment you hit the bed, you cannot sleep. You roll around, you toss, and you just, no matter what you do, you cannot sleep. And so you show up to the doctor and you tell the doctor the whole predicament, you can't sleep, and the doctor gives you sleeping pills. And then you pop in the sleeping pills and you go back to bed and you lay down on the giant metal spike sticking out of the bed, and it's just bludgeoning your back and there's blood and you just can't sleep. You've prescribed, or the doctor has prescribed, the wrong solution because he didn't diagnose the problem. You see, you have to know the problem before you start looking for a solution. You have to define the problem. You have to know exactly what the problem is before you start looking for a solution. The diagnosis, what a doctor decides is wrong with you and what is wrong in your life or what is wrong in this incident or area or your work or your goals and success, whatever the problem is has to be defined. You have to have a proper diagnosis, because a problem defined is already half solved. If you have a problem and you just start throwing solutions at it, you have no idea what type of solution you're going to get. So a problem defined is already half solved. You see, we love finding things and fixing things and looking for strategic solutions and being innovative and having a breakthrough moment. But sometimes the thing either isn't broken in the first place, or we're looking at it wrong or doing it wrong, or the whole idea is fundamentally flawed, or it just sounds good and it won't work for any particular reason. And so sometimes it's good to just start with finding out what in the world the problem is in the first place. Defining the problem in life or in work or in your hobbies or in whatever you're feeling stuck in. Defining the problem is key, and make sure it's actually a problem. Don't just solve something that doesn't exist as a problem. You see, maybe you're bored and you're like, okay, I'm bored. I need to reach for my phone, so I'm not going to be bored. Well, if you were to think about it, being bored is not necessarily a problem. It's not necessarily desirable, but it's not a problem. So if you were to define the problem is you don't have anything exciting to do, or you can't sit in silence for more than 10 minutes, then the problem being defined is you can't sit in silence for 10 minutes and you can't focus. Well, the best way to counter that is to sit in silence and force yourself to focus and start in little increments and work your way up until you can focus for a longer period of time. So the solution might feel like just reach for your phone because you solved the problem, but you didn't actually define the problem. The problem is not that you're bored. The problem is that you can't sit still and focus and concentrate. The problem itself often reveals the solution. You see, if you just hammer the problem and define the problem and make sure the problem is so clear, then the solution sometimes just presents itself automatically. I think about so many problems in work, or when you're trying to convince a group of people to do something and make a change. If you just give them all the solutions, they might like them, they may love them, may be a great idea, but there's not as much desire to do it because they don't recognize what the problem is in the first place. If you want people to change, if you want to try a new idea, sometimes you have to hammer the problem and make sure they realize and feel the problem. And as the problem just seeps into every aspect and they realize how bad the problem is, then they can't help but want to come up with a solution or see your solution as an obvious solution. Focusing on the problem makes the why abundantly obvious. But here's the thing, we just love to go straight for the tips and tricks. We love to start optimizing something before we even figure out if the fundamental core is good. We just like to start adding tips and tricks to our life without figuring out, are we missing a giant chunk of our life in the first place? We like to just go straight for the self-help books and articles and Google AI and just see what we can find and ways to optimize stuff without understanding what the problem is in the first place. We just ignore figuring out the problem. We like to add grease to the oven wheel without checking to see if it's even plugged in. The little wheel where you turn it to a certain temperature, we just add a little bit of grease and hope that helps because it's a tip and trick to get your oven to work. But if it's not plugged in, it's not going to work. You have to make sure you have the problem defined. And the problem is defined as there's no electricity coming into your oven. Then you start there. You don't just add a little bit of grease to the knob. Starting with the problem and defining the problem is a huge part of finding any solution and finding any innovation. And the moment you see this, the moment you realize it applies pretty much anywhere. If you're stuck spiritually and you can't figure out what to do next, or you just feel like you're not having any breakthrough, you could just go look at a bunch of solutions and decide, oh, I need to pray more, or I need to fast, or I need to sit in silence, or I need to read more. But if you were to define the problem and focus on the problem, then the solution is naturally going to present itself. If you're stuck mentally and you just don't have any motivation, you can just go look at motivation and it might help. But if you don't know what the problem is, then you don't know exactly which solution is going to fix it. If you're stuck in your work or your hobbies, or you're just not having a creative moment, or you don't even know what hobby to do, or you're tired of your hobbies, figure out what the problem is instead of just jumping for a new hobby and trying something else. Because if you just try a bunch of different stuff, yeah, it may work out. I'm a big fan of trying stuff and failing, but define the problem in the first place. You have a better chance of succeeding. In relationships, if you're having trouble with a friendship or a more close relationship or with a family member, and you just immediately jump for solutions and look up relationship advice and don't define the problem, there's a good chance you're going to make a mistake and do something stupid that doesn't actually help the situation. And ultimately, it's just like throwing good money after something bad. I think of like in advertising. If you have a really good ad for a movie and you throw a bunch of money at it, that is the solution. Throw a bunch of money at a good ad and it gets better. But then if you have a really bad ad and you just throw a bunch of money at it thinking you just need more money, well, you're probably just making things worse. You're throwing good money after bad. And so defining the problem, realizing that the ad itself is ineffective and not getting people's attention, or the YouTube hook is not getting someone's attention, or your speaking style is not getting someone's attention, is going to be a good step towards actually figuring out the solution. Because if you don't define the problem, the solution is not going to be as obvious and it's not going to help as much. You see, symptoms can often be similar. Different problems can have similar symptoms. And if we just look at the symptoms and make a quick correlation and don't actually define it, what is actually happening, sometimes we're going to give the wrong antidote to the wrong problem because we didn't define the problem. And I think there's a reason we don't like this. We don't like it because there's a lot of pride in finding a solution and wanting to figure out how to fix something without really looking for the problem. Because nobody wants to be a problem looker for. I mean, you don't want to just look around and find problems and be a complainer, obviously. But if you don't focus on the problem and don't elaborate on what the problem is and look at your mistake, then you probably aren't going to find a good solution. But our pride gets in the way. We don't want to analyze the problem of our creativity or the problem of our hobby or the problem in the relationship because it might show that we're at fault in some tiny way. But if we don't define the problem and we don't face reality, we probably aren't going to fix it. Same thing in hobbies or work or relationships or spiritual things, whatever it is. If you don't define the problem, there's a good chance your solution is actually not going to help too much. I've been told and I've heard when you don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. I think it's a great management idea. It's a great concept. You want your employees to be looking for solutions, but I think sometimes it helps us, or it keeps us from facing the reality of the problem. And I think about YouTube and books and people and conversation, just everywhere you go, people want to be brilliant. There's part of me that just wants to be brilliant. I want to just share how to do this or how to, just quit social media or how to do this or how to make a great movie. And we all want to be seen as brilliant. We want to help people. But sometimes we're just trying to be brilliant without actually figuring out if we're solving a problem. I'm not hating on electric cars, but I just remember someone saying, if electric cars are the answer, what was the question? You can find some good questions and think through some good reasons of what is the problem that electric cars solve. But sometimes you just have a great idea and it just doesn't actually help anybody. And so focusing on the problem helps you come up with a better solution. Now, problems, I just said, can be cynical and they can be complaining, but looking at the problem and at least properly defining it is the start towards the solution. You don't want to stay on the problem. You do want to move towards the solution, but you can't just ignore the problem. You actually have to face it. And then ultimately, as we're talking about problems, just know if you think you can find satisfaction and perfection on this earth, you are looking in the wrong place. You will not find satisfaction. You will not fix all your problems on this earth, no matter how well you define it, because our problems are not solved on this earth. They're solved through a relationship with Jesus Christ. And so, that.